Hello, and welcome to our webinar on employment-related COVID issues, part of our In the Pipeline series. I'm Ailey Murray, Senior Counsel in the Employment team.
And I'm Elliot Roberts, an Associate in the Employment team.
Our first topic is hot off the press following the announcement of this year's budget. But before we delve into that, it might be helpful to have a quick look at some of the stats on the job retention scheme. So as at the end of January this year, 4.7 million jobs per day were furloughed. And cumulatively, that amounted to 11.2 million jobs since the start of the scheme, and that's across 1.3 million employers. And the wages that have been covered so far amounts to £53.8 billion. So there's some pretty large numbers there. And so the furlough scheme has been extended, hasn't it, Elliot?
That's right, Ailey. The furlough scheme was due to stop at the end of April, but it has now been confirmed that the scheme will continue until September. This will be a welcome relief to a lot of employers, and somewhat unexpectedly will run for a number of months following the earliest end of social distancing measures in June. Furloughed employees under the scheme will continue to receive 80% of their salary, capped at £2,500 a month, until the scheme ends at the end of September.
And this furlough scheme can still be used on a flexible basis, which involves bringing employees back to work part-time. We expect that this might become more common, particularly in the interim period before all of the social distancing measures are relaxed and as businesses slowly try to get back to normal. Social distancing measures are due to end no earlier than June, which ties into a key change in the furlough scheme. From July, employers will be asked for a contribution of 10% towards the hours their staff do not work. And in August and September, that will rise to 20%. Accordingly, the government contribution will drop from 80% to 70% in July and then 60% for August and September. So this is back to the tapering we saw in October and November last year.
And talking about the relaxation of social distancing measures, we know a lot of people are eager to return to the office instead of working from home. Currently, the government's guidance remains that everyone who can work at home should do so. The government's roadmap to easing lockdown restrictions, released on the 22nd of February, stated that the stay-at-home order will end on the 29th of March, although many lockdown restrictions will remain in place after this time. This includes the guidance that people should continue to work from home where possible. It's foreseeable that this guidance will remain in place until the end of the social distancing measures, which, as we've already mentioned, are due to run until the 21st of June.
If an employer chooses to reopen their offices before the end of the social distancing measures, we expect that the Health and Safety Executive will pay particular attention to whether COVID secure guidance has been followed. A lot of employers went through the process of preparing for opening their offices last summer. Even so, it would be prudent for these employers to revisit their COVID secure risk assessments to see if any updates should be made. And for any employers that didn't open last summer and intend to wait until the end of the social distancing measures before reopening, it's unclear whether the COVID secure guidance will remain in place, including the requirement to have a specific risk assessment.
Workplace COVID testing is also something that seems to be discussed more frequently when talking about reopening offices. The government released guidance about this on the 26th of February, which encourages as many employers as possible to sign up to regularly test their employees. The test used is generally the lateral flow test, which is a fast and simple test and does not require a laboratory to process. It's recommended that employers offer their workforce access to a minimum of 2 lateral flow tests every single week.
Currently, free lateral flow tests provided by the government are only available to employers who have 50 or more employees, and those employees cannot work from home. Previously, this was only available to employers with 250 or more employees. So the criteria for the free tests has been eased, but it's unlikely to apply to office workers who can work from home.
Employers can, of course, choose to self-fund testing kits as part of reopening offices, but this would come at a cost, and we're already hearing reports of a surge in demand for these kits, so finding a reliable supply may be difficult.
Okay, that brings us on to the vaccine, because of course the rollout is well underway. As at the start of this week, just over 20 million people had received their first jab, with almost 800,000 fully vaccinated. And the government has announced that its aim is that all adults will have been offered the vaccine by the end of July. It's all very encouraging in terms of getting back to normal, but it does throw up a few questions for employers, doesn't it, Elliot?
Yes, it certainly does. One of the main questions employers seem to be asking now is whether they can require all staff to have the vaccine.
Well, I suppose the starting point is that you can't force someone to have the vaccine. That would be assault. One way an employer might try to impose it is to introduce a contractual requirement to be vaccinated, but that would require individual employees' consent. A softer approach might be to introduce a policy which says you're required to have a vaccine in order to come into the workplace.
So it's not really a no jab, no job policy, but a restricted workplace access policy. It would presumably work in a similar way to the vaccine passport that is frequently discussed in the media at the moment, although that's not without its risks, is it, Ailey?
Definitely not, particularly in the employee context. And if an employer is talking about disciplining or potentially dismissing someone who refuses to have the vaccine, then you open yourself up to possible breach of trust and confidence claims, unfair dismissal, and also potentially discrimination claims.
Could an employer try to argue that such a requirement was a reasonable management instruction with the aim of protecting other employees and visitors?
That might be a defence, but as the government haven't mandated the vaccine, and there is legislation that specifically states that members of the public should not be compelled to undergo any medical treatment, including vaccinations, that might not be easy to demonstrate. Although it might depend on the type of business the employer operates and whether having the vaccination is necessary for them to carry out their job.
That makes sense. You could imagine a nursing home perhaps being able to justify the position more easily than a large office-based professional services employer on the basis that home staff have to be on site and are working with the vulnerable, but many staff in professional services firm presumably could still work remotely. How would such a requirement give rise to discrimination claims though?
So there'll be many people who, for health reasons, cannot have the vaccine, where they might have an underlying disability, or, for example, pregnant women where the advice at the moment is that they currently shouldn't receive the vaccine. You might also have people refuse because of particular religious beliefs or philosophical beliefs. So in those circumstances, you've got the potential for claims of discrimination on the grounds of disability, pregnancy, maternity, and religion or belief. And also at the moment, there would be a risk of age discrimination on the basis that the younger population have not been prioritised yet for the vaccine.
I see. So that would be a risk of an indirect discrimination claim then. Do you think an employer might be able to justify a requirement to get the vaccine on the grounds that it was a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim?
Possibly, but that would involve similar arguments to justifying a dismissal and would likely be quite fact specific depending on the employer's business. The legitimate aim would be protecting health and safety of employees and possibly clients. The harder part would be demonstrating that it is a proportionate means of achieving the legitimate aim, particularly if there are less intrusive steps that could be taken to achieve the same aim, for example, letting people to continue to work from home.
Do you think that it makes a difference when comparing existing employees with new recruits, the idea of no jab, no job policy for new hires? We've all seen the reports about the new owner of Pimlico Plumbers, who has said that he wouldn't offer a job to anyone who hasn't been vaccinated.
I think there is a bit of a distinction between existing employees and new hires. It's unlawful for an employer to ask a job candidate about their health prior to offering them a role. And so asking about vaccination would be unlawful. However, it is easier to add in an immunisation clause into their contracts than to amend existing employees' contracts.
And that will still give rise to the same discrimination risks we discussed earlier.
Yes.
It's clear then that what employers should be doing is conducting a risk assessment and assessing whether they need people to be vaccinated in order to operate safely and what other safety measures they could put in place, like we have at the moment with social distancing and face coverings, staggered shifts, and so on.
I agree. I suppose some employees might also need to be vaccinated in order to travel for work. So that might be another basis for requiring someone to be vaccinated. But that would be no different to now, where you might require an employee to have certain inoculations to travel to Africa or parts of Asia, for example.
Indeed, I think where most employers are coming from at the moment is that they will encourage staff to be vaccinated by promoting the benefits and safety of vaccines, but stop short of enforcing this as a rule. But we need to wait and see how things develop, really.
Yes. In fact, there was a recent survey by HR Locker, which suggested that only 23% of employers plan to require staff to be vaccinated, whereas 51% said they would encourage staff to be vaccinated through information and awareness.
What do you think about the idea of a vaccination policy? Do you think that would be useful?
Yes, possibly. To encourage employees to take up the vaccine, it could set out the circumstances where the employer might require employees to be vaccinated and demonstrate the justification for that. It needs to be flexible though, and it would have to make it clear that they recognise that there'll be circumstances where it is not possible or appropriate for a specific employee to have the vaccine, and that they won't be penalised for refusing to have it. It could also cover the data protection aspects of the vaccination, including setting out the basis on which that relevant data will be processed.
That makes sense. Although, as with all policies, it will be important for the employer to make sure that it is actually implemented rather than just being words on paper.
Yes, it's what an employer does in practice that'll be important. And so whatever approach the employer takes, they just need to be aware of the risks. And I think that concludes our short webinar on the latest COVID-related issues for employers. Obviously, there are a range of issues for employers associated with COVID and workplace reopening, and we've just scratched the surface today, but we wanted to bring you the key developments for the coming months. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please do get in touch with a member of the team.